councils and complaints. When have you made a complaint to council? I think everybody's been I've been dealing with councils a bit lately on dog registration. It is a very entertaining process, and it's not earth-shattering, of course. But, it can be over your bins, your fence, neighbourhood dispute. The Ombudsman has released a report today into Glen Eira City Council's approach to contractor work. Now, in a nutshell, the contractor carried out this is the point, an answer, carried out footpath works near a resident's property. The resident noticed flooding after the works, called a plumber, quoted $4,100 to fix it. Resident goes to the council wanting reimbursement. Council refuses to deal with the resident, told him to deal with the contractor. In came the Ombudsman to investigate and try and fix it. Ombudsman Deborah Glass, good morning.
Good morning, Neil.
You failed. Not fixed.
Not yet fixed. I'm still reasonably confident it will, because the council's position has moved since we started this investigation. But really, this is all about councils taking responsibility for the work of their contractors, and they need to do that.
So, but how long have you been working on this?
Well, the complaint came to us last year, and as we do with all of with complaints of this sort, we make inquiries, we engage with the council. They were particularly intractable fairly early on, and the initial response was, essentially not me, Gov. It's a matter for the contractor. As we became involved, they took further responsibility, but their response was wrong. And the reason I've tabled this report today is that we think it's pretty likely this is a problem that is far wider than one council. We know that councils subcontract work throughout Victoria, buildings, maintenance, waste, whatever. And what councils do when people complain about those services is very, very different.
Well, this is going back 5 years now. 2018 it started with the work. The work was done. The problem started.
The problem started in 2018, but the complainant wasn't aware of it until last year.
Yeah. Okay.
So it has, the complaint itself is not so long running.
You've had the problem before with councils and what is a complaint, what is a service question, and you've sort of sorted that out. They were really hiding complaints, weren't they?
They were, and we've chatted a lot about councils and complaints over the years, Neil, and this is the latest iteration in this. And I regularly say you should love your complaints. They're free feedback. This is your ratepayers, your residents, your customers telling you how they find your services, and you should want to know. So, when it comes to contractors, this is a specific issue. Some councils have got this right, but clearly Glen Eira didn't, and I suspect many other councils are in that.
Before we get to detail, I'm surprised that any council couldn't resist your charms. I mean, you come and knock on the door. I'm the Ombudsman. Hang on, I don't know what's going on here. I mean, that's like the drug squad knocking in the middle of a rave party.
This is why I'm reasonably optimistic that this will be resolved. I'm disappointed that I can't tell you today that it has been, but I think tabling a public report is a very good way of exposing a problem and encouraging a resolution.
And the problem was works are done by the contractor of the council, and the bloke gets flooded.
Yeah, so the works are done on a footpath some years before. Somebody discovers that there's flooding under their property, gets a plumber in. Plumber puts a camera in, discovers in this case, a lot of rocks that appeared to be from council's footpath works a few years previously, and the resident presents this evidence to the council, basically expecting the council to resolve the matter. But the council treats it as a claim rather than a complaint and says, you've got to go to the contractor, not a matter for us. And that's what we say is wrong.
Well, it's not fair.
Well, exactly. But the issue for me was not about the actual liability. It's about what the council is doing to resolve the complaint for its own resident.
So do you have a view on the liability?
Well, not yet, because we haven't actually reached that stage. And this is where I suspect the matter will eventually be resolved, because the council has since denied liability, but it hasn't yet provided the evidence on which it has done that.
Okay, so councils would generally, they'd employ many contractors, wouldn't they?
They do. Many council serve. I mean, I think there's, billions of dollars of council services around Victoria are outsourced to third parties.
Have you had other examples of them trying to duck shove and say, oh, that's all the contractor's issue, or you just suspect it exists?
Oh, we know it happens. We certainly have had other complaints about contractors. Others have been resolved much more quickly, so they tend not to appear in public reports.
I'm just thinking if I'm a council and I employ a contractor, I take responsibility for what the contractor does. It's to some extent anyway, and I can go and sort it out with the contractor.
Absolutely.
I suppose. Yeah.
Well, if the contractor ultimately is not liable, the council is not liable. But the point here is the council should be resolving the complaint. So take a look at it, take responsibility, look at the evidence. If the evidence isn't good enough, well, fine. This is not about forking out ratepayer money for irresponsibly.
Well, why won't they sort it out? What's their rationale?
Well, the only rationale they've provided so far is that they've denied liability, but they haven't provided the evidence on which they've done that. And so the next stage of the process is, explain to the complainant why, explain on what basis you said you're not going to do this, and give this person a right of review, because that's what we expect when you make a complaint.
Okay, in a moment, long-running battles with your council. Are they denying responsibility? Go and deal with it. Even the contractors would collect rubbish, wouldn't they?
Well, that's very frequently waste services are contracted out. But we also know some councils do this well. I mean, we've got an example of Burundara Council who have a really good policy for dealing with contractors. So one of the key points for me is that we've got widely different practices across 79 councils. We know that only 30 councils even have a policy about dealing with contractors. So there's a message here for the other 78 councils in Victoria. You need to take a good look at your own policies and make sure that these are covered.
We've talked about many bizarre things over the years, but this just seems to defy logic.
Oh, it's the latest in a long-running saga involving councils and complaints, and they are doing it better. In my 9 years in the gig, I have definitely seen progress. When I think back a few years ago when we had a metropolitan council that said it only had 100 complaints a year, and the rural council that had 1,000, but the metropolitan council had 300,000 requests for service that weren't really complaints. We have come a long way.
Calls in a moment, 133693. Just another issue, Operation Daintree, which we spoke about at length on the program last week, which is the IBAC findings on the issue of the contract being awarded to an offshoot of the Health Services Union for training of staff and not going through proper process and the rest. That began on your desk, did it not?
It did, yes. That was initially an ombudsman investigation. What often happens in cases like this, and it is set out in the report, there's whistleblowers will make allegations, and as happened in this case. IBAC is the clearinghouse for whistleblower allegations, and if they don't meet at the time IBAC's high threshold, they often send them to me. So we began this investigation. We worked on it for a good 6 months, and what became clear to us is that there was a suspicion of corrupt conduct on the part of, in this case, the Premier and 2 former Ministers for Health. If we have a suspicion of corrupt conduct when we're investigating something, we send it back to IBAC. We're required to. That's what the law requires, and IBAC can then take it on themselves, send it back to us. In this case, as we have all seen, IBAC retained that investigation and went on and did its own.
So your finding is no... Well, is it a finding?
No, because we provided IBAC with all of our evidence. We said, here you are, there's a suspicion of corrupt conduct on the part of 3 ministers here. Over to you. And they then took it on, took our all the evidence we'd obtained, made their own inquiries, of course, and published their report. But
it's as strong as after you're looking at there was a suspicion of corrupt conduct by the Premier and 2 ministers.
Yes, I mean, and when that happens, that's a requirement to refer. That's what we did. It's a relatively low threshold.
What did you think of the Premier's reaction, saying it was an educational report?
I think it says a lot about the Premier's views on corruption and integrity.
What does it say?
It was not an educational report. It was a damning report about misconduct of ministerial advisors and ministerial responsibility for those advisors. It was not what I would have described as an educational report.
See, I found that, I don't know how far you can go on this, I found that a bit disappointing because it's almost as if the message was lost. in there. I mean, yes, there are no direct findings of corruption, although there is, you can look at, you don't have to look too hard to find the criticism. But to say it was just an educational report and, tick a box, to me, it missed the point.
Well, it did miss the point, but I go back to the point I made last year when IBAC and I tabled our Joint Operation Watts report. There is this vast area, Robert Redley has described as grey corruption, that doesn't meet this very high threshold of corruption that constitutes a criminal offence in Victoria. So, what you and I, and what I expect the vast majority of your listeners think of as corruption actually doesn't meet the legal test. But it's wrong, and it's unethical conduct. And at the moment, and this is why we made the major recommendations we did last year, there's no sanctions for it. So you can make all of these findings about unethical behaviour, breaches of codes that are not actually corruption. And at present, the chances are nothing is going to happen. So the two key things we recommended last year, which the government has committed to implementing, and let us see what happens, were a parliamentary committee, a parliamentary ethics committee that is not government controlled, that would be responsible for setting and administering codes of practice, and a parliamentary integrity commissioner that would actually have the power to investigate these breaches of codes and ethical standards.
I was reading the definition of corruption under IBAC in New South Wales, and I'm no lawyer, but it seemed to me that what happened here might have fitted under that New South Wales definition of corruption. Is that correct?
Well, I've certainly heard other commentary. I don't think it's not really for me to comment on the definition of corruption. I mean, there are corruption bodies. IBAC will no doubt have its own views on that. But the gap for me, and this was exposed last year in our joint report, was the lack of any kind of apparent sanction when something falls into the area that is not up at that high level of criminal conduct, but is still wrong. It's unethical. It offends our notions of the way people should behave. And at the moment, that is a significant gap in our system.
What can you define grey corruption for me?
It's conduct that falls short of criminal, that breaches of standards, codes. It's unethical conduct. It's the sort of thing we saw in Operation Daintree last week. And
we shouldn't accept it.
No, it's wrong. It's absolutely wrong, and it is unethical. It may be immoral. It breaches public sector codes, ministerial codes potentially, but it's not criminal.
A number of integrity officers have left the employ of the government of late. Does that concern you?
Well, people's terms will come to an end. My own term will be coming to an end
How's the
within
funding?
the next year. So this is inevitable. That's a fact of life. We all have fixed terms, and I think that's inherently not a bad thing.
But in very simple terms, for the people listening now, is the standard of propriety in government in Victoria good enough?
No, it's not, and one of the comments we've made jointly last year was Victoria is now a laggard rather than a leader in parliamentary integrity. And I think people rightly are concerned about that. And we have fallen behind in not having enforceable standards, transparent, accountable, enforceable standards for people in public life when it falls short of that high threshold for criminal conduct. And this, if those recommendations that we made last year are implemented, and the government has committed to that, so I think we all need to be holding them accountable for what they said they were going to do, then that will fill that gap. So I'm looking forward to that, and I think it's incumbent on all of us to keep the pressure on them.
We'll try. Thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure.
Ombudsman Deborah Glass.